Okay. So I just wanted to try to give some heads up that I'll be going on and off screen share quite a bit. I would prefer not to be too much on sharing some photos and slides, just talking a lot more. So bear with me as I go to and fro. Also, I know it's a weird experience sometimes talking just to blank faces and not knowing what's going on. So if you can keep your videos on, but it's okay if you can't as well. Either way is appreciated. Hey Piyush, thanks. All right, cool. Hey Pramita. Okay, I'll stop acknowledging now, everyone. Anyway, so let me start from the beginning. So the journey for this trip goes back to 30th of December, 2014. And if you could imagine that around this time, a lot of people were setting resolutions for the next year, how they're going to be better, how they're going to be different the year forward. And just around this time, I happened to see this article by a friend, Zenis Pawan. He shared it on Facebook and it was getting quite a bit of attention. So I started to read it. And the article basically said that when you're looking to set resolutions, um, think about it slightly differently. Don't just go the standard way. And the analogy that the author was drawing to was the fact that imagine that your life is a movie, right? And what makes good movies? In most movies, you would see an actor or the actress entering some sort of conflict situation, some sort of pathway. He called it a door, a metaphorical door. And once you commit to entering that door, either you do it yourself or the environment forces it on you. You're stuck in that door, right? You're stuck in that room. And to be able to get out of that, you have to exit through another door, which means that, like if you think about situations, you stumble upon a map and you decide to go on this adventure, or a villain keeps you away from your loved one, and then that's your entry to that door. And then whether you like it or not, in some form you have to find a way to get out of another door and reach some conclusion, either happy or sad. So the author was claiming that you should do that with your goals as well. So force yourself to enter a door, because we don't have a lot of motivations ourselves, and we need to almost get ourselves in a situation where there's no point of return. So that was the way the author was trying to encourage people to think about goals. So you force yourself to enter this metaphorical door, and then once you're there, you'll find a way to lead to some conclusion. And one of the examples that this guy had was about, hey, instead of saying that you'll get fit, commit for something. So enter a door, commit for something, and say that, you know what, I'm going to run a half marathon in an exotic country. And that particular and I'll book the non-refundable tickets. That particular line, just word to word, really stuck with me, and I was like, why not? Why not take that plunge, enter this door? And the next day, I booked. Like I started searching for various exotic marathons that are across the world, terrains from. Like there was even a run in Galapagos that I saw was very interesting. There was one in Patagonia. This one in particular, the one in China, the Great Wall Marathon, just caught my eye. And because I was based in Singapore and it was easy anyway on my in my radar was a lot of Southeast Asia countries, and China was definitely one of them, which I had not explored. So I thought, why not? Next day, I booked non-refundable tickets, the cheapest ones to China, and I also got myself booked on this half marathon on the Great Wall. What's not to love, right? This you get to push yourself to run a half marathon and also explore one of the wonders of the world. So that was the plunge that I took. So that was me entering this door from which it's hard to come back. So that was the start of why China happened. And when I told myself that, hey, I'm going to do this marathon, so let me schedule my trip in a way that the marathon is towards the end, the half marathon is towards the end, because I don't really know whether I'll be in a state to explore anything after the marathon. I had not was not very physically active. The maximum I'd done was a 110K run sometime a year ago in Pune before that. And I thought 21 kilometers is a good stretch. I'll walk it out. It's not a competition. Just explore and enjoy the natural beauty of what China has to offer. So that was how I planned my trip. That I'd give myself maybe 2.5 weeks before the marathon, do the marathon, and then just relax and come back and rest. So that's a little bit about how the whole journey of the trip started. And as you can imagine, New Year, everyone's super excited. Goals, typically, at least for the first few weeks, you ensure that you stick with your goals. So the month of Jan and Feb, I actually prepped pretty well. So the goal was 21 kilometers. So I told myself, most sites also suggest that if you're able to do maybe 14 to 15 kilometers on the day, you should be able to do 21. This one was difficult because the Great Wall actually has 5,162 steps climbing up and down the wall. So it's a little bit more intense. So in my mind, I was like, okay, I need to do 15 kilometers. Jan and Feb, as I said, momentum was high. Managed to probably do 10, 11 kilometers at a stretch. I did 15 kilometers once. And then unfortunately, I had ulcers and sores, and in mid-Feb, I completely stopped. So there was a big break between mid-Feb and May. But I'll come back to that absence of time. Just share my screen now. Walk you through some slides. So that's just the precursor of the trip. So it's marathon was the trigger, but also of course I want to explore China and see different things that the country has to offer. Right? Can you see my screen? Okay.
Yes.
Great. Yeah. So as I said, started exploring all these different marathons around the world. This one caught my attention. Something that I do very often is always my wallpaper is the next destination that I'm looking to explore. So this was for a long time my wallpaper in 2015. Yeah, so as you see my background and this, I just wanted to give you some context on how big China is. So China is about 3 times the size of India. And in the way I was planning my trip, this was the longest trip I was doing. I had done small trips of 4 days, 5 days, even solo travel in that fashion. But this was the longest 3-week travel that I was planning. I was still prioritizing where I should visit and what kinds of things I should do. So I knew that I'm going to be around this area, right? Beijing and the Great Wall, which is not too far. Tianjin is a city near Beijing. And I told myself that, perhaps let's leave it a little open-ended, but the Terracotta Army is something that everyone says is a marvel to see. So in my mind, I was determined to say that I'll do Beijing and I'll probably just go to Xi'an and explore the food there. As you can imagine, just like in India, people assume that Chinese food is similar across, but it's very, very different in different regions. The spice level, the kind of things that they eat is quite different. And Xi'an in particular had an interesting cuisine. So I thought, might as well explore that city and hit multiple things at a time. So that was the high level plan. Nothing booked, just the hostel booked in Beijing for the 3-week period. That's typically what I do when I travel. For the visa purpose, you need to show that you have a reservation. So I just book one hostel. They're always refundable bookings, so you can just cancel it a few days after you get your visa. That's what I've always been doing when I travel. So I booked that, and with a very limited plan, I plunged and I reached Tianjin. Now, just to share a little bit more, typically when I travel, some things to keep in mind is download offline maps, have some level, especially the language is different. I found this beautiful dictionary called Pleco, which was a lifesaver, and I'll talk a little bit about why in a bit. But this allows you to do, you can just speak into it, it'll translate it into Mandarin. People can scribble on it and it will translate it into English, so you can have conversations in that fashion. It also has a beautiful OCR recognition. So if you have a menu in front of you, you can just very confidently raise your hand, scan things, and on the fly order. And I'll talk just a bit about that. So that was one, just having these offline maps and this dictionary in place. Another thing that I also insist that people should do before they travel to other countries is try to learn a few words. So I told myself that I'll learn at least 20-25 words. So I knew the numbers, I knew some slang. And I mean, there's quirky things that they do in Mandarin with the way some of their numbers sound. So for example, 5 sound. The sound of 5 is sun. So sun Q. This is what they would type, and this is very popular and common in even in Singapore. People used to use this. So 88 is bye ba. So bye. So just abusing some of the things that you know. There was one particular phrase, as I said, I think I'm always curious about local slang, and it's a little explicit, but what it really means. So, Dio Paolo means it's blown my mind. And oh, this is fantastic. So, just like that, I learned a couple of phrases, and I wasn't shy at all to use them in different settings. And I think what that does is it really finds a way for you to open up with locals, and locals appreciate the fact that you can use or have heard of something as weird as a slang that they use. So this was my first meal when I just landed in Tianjin. Uh, as you can see, the menu in front of me, I used the Pleco app and it was so good. So very confidently, I could say, oh, this is pork, this is beef, this is something else, and order exactly what I wanted. That gave me another sense of confidence. The meal was so good. It's called a bun bao. This meal that from the get-go, I decided that I'm going to make this trip a little bit more about food. And there was another very strong recommendation by a local to explore something in Tianjin itself. So on the same day, within a span of an hour, I had two of the same kind of things. But the one on the right, of course, was significantly better, aesthetically more pleasing as well. Right. Then, so from Tianjin, I took a metro, a fast rail speed to Beijing. It's about 90 kilometers, I believe, but it takes 30 minutes, 35 minutes or something to get there. Very seamless process. So I landed in Beijing, and I always stay in hostels. This is a very simple hostel, very cheap. For me, the concept of traveling is travel light, travel cheap, and find ways to explore non-touristy areas. So unfortunately, the hostel where I was placed, or the other thing to do with hostel research is, because especially if you're traveling by yourself, is to ensure that the hostels have a nice communal area where people come together and they have a nice reception where people can talk and meet. And that's always a good place to hear from other travelers in terms of what they have experienced and what suggestions they have. So this was the area that the hostel was situated in, a very touristy area. By a rule that I set for myself, when I go to a new city, I like to see different parts of the city. There's, of course, if you just stay in one part, imagine if I just stayed in this touristy part, all I would see, or all one would typically see, is just that world, what they're trying to sell you. And you get sold random things that nobody cares about. No, none of the locals really care about. Like there were keychains with lizards, live lizards in them, to just like random things that only appeal to tourists. No local would meaningfully have it. So those kinds of things is something that I always tell myself, that when I'm in a city, one, I like to give myself the luxury of time to explore different parts of the city, because I think especially if you're able to stay in a different part of the city, you see the city in a completely different way. You experience the culture also in a completely different way. So one thing that I always do is abuse public transport. So very quickly find a way to understand where the metro lines take you. And it's fairly simple to explore the city on your own once you know how to navigate a metro, which most of us should be able to. Of course, it's a little hard because sometimes some of the metros didn't have like those beeping lights to tell you which exactly stop you're at. They would just announce it, so you have to keep talking to locals. So that was a little bit of a challenge. But in most of Beijing's metros, they had that, and one line I remember they didn't have it. And people are really helpful. So people see you there, they know that you don't look like them, and in a sense, they are very curious about who you are and where you're from. So everyone's, I mean, if you just say a small ni hao, you'll open up into a conversation, and you'll not know where that could go. And a lot of what I'll share probably is around some of those aspects. Right? Yeah. So I typically love to take the metro to unknown places. Just get down at a random place, so walk around there, get a sense of what local people are really doing. Do you all know what game this is?
Checkers,
it's Go, right?
Yeah, it's Go.
Yeah.
So this is one of those very, very popular, famous games There was recently DeepMind, not recently, 2-3 years ago, it was a big test for artificial intelligence to be able to win against.
But is
So
it
it's very,
Chinese checker?
yeah, it's a version of that. So they played, and you'd see this everywhere on the streets. And this is so common. People just in the afternoon, sitting outside, having a drink and playing this game. You'll also see scenes like this, which are not uncommon for us here. So one part of China in Beijing that's reserved is something called hutongs. So hutongs are these the traditional homes which they have now made it a World Heritage Site, and they're not allowing them to sort of do away with these establishments. So it was nice and peaceful, but I still felt it was more touristy than actual people living there. Of course, people lived there and they had like cats and hens and stuff like that. And it's right in the city, right in the center of the city. So you can imagine Beijing, where the real estate prices are so high. To see something like this was a welcome change. And for all the vegetarians out there, don't lose hope because Beijing does have a fair amount of vegetarian restaurants. So these are not uncommon to see something like this once in a while. You have to find them, and this one I just happened to come across in one of those metro trips that I took. So you will find them. So don't worry about not being able to have food. There'll be limited food, and you have to ensure that they don't add fish oil and things like that. But there are things for you as well. So don't hold yourself back. Yeah, for me, however, that was not a constraint. So I have a limited boundary in terms of what I would try. So Beijing and China offered a lot of spectrum of. I can see some people going off video and getting disgusted. But yeah, so there's a lot of interesting cuisine there, and this surprisingly was not at a market that was for tourists. So this was like their local market, and these are some things that they actually have as delicacies. They deep fry them, and after you deep fry most things, actually you can't differentiate the taste. So yeah, I'll leave this.
Just curious, what are those things like?
Which ones? These ones?
Yeah.
I forget exactly what they are. I think there were some lava eggs or something.
Kinder Joy, no? It looks like Kinder Joy.
It certainly did taste like Kinder Joy, but I can't remember. I think there's some.
Is it not chestnuts?
Chestnuts, okay. I don't think it's a vegetarian stuff.
It's not vegetarian. None of these were vegetarian.
Okay.
But so most of them, they just deep fry them and some soy sauce, and they're just crunchy.
But you in the deep, with you in that picture?
This?
Yeah.
Oh, this was just, I think, a lamb piece or something.
Oh.
But I sampled some of the other ones as well. Probably share a video of me eating some of them, but maybe in a separate conversation. Yeah, so I got to Beijing on the weekdays, and the way I planned it was to say that let me try to explore the touristy things on the weekdays, so that because weekends there's likely to be a rush. So let's go on the weekdays and explore things like the Forbidden Kingdom, Tiananmen Square, Summer Palace, and those other things, so that you have most of the place to yourself. And Beijing is quite beautiful, actually. It's very well structured. People broadly follow traffic rules. It's easy to cross roads. All of that, you don't have the chaos that you would expect in a big city. So it was fairly simple to get to places as well. I won't talk too much about monuments. I'll focus more on experiences. Another interesting thing that this was in the Forbidden Kingdom, I believe, is the fact that these audio tours are so well managed. A lot of places in India also have these, but the way this was, I was just blown away by how seamless it was. Everywhere you walk, it knows exactly where you are, and the audio plays. It tells you, it navigates you and tells you where you need to go next. And you get such a depth of perspective of that place, of the history, of the culture, of the monuments. So I was quite blown away by this, and I spent probably a day just in Forbidden Kingdom. It's very beautiful, and certainly something that if you are in Beijing, you will definitely visit. Yeah, so these were just some of the palaces. Very nice architecture, very serene and calm. the sky, as you can see, is sometimes, I mean, it's, I was worried the way people talk about Beijing being extremely foggy all the time and you can't see anything. Most of the days that I was there, it was quite clear. So it didn't feel any challenge, or I didn't struggle in any way. Yeah, this is another trekking trip that we had to do. I just wanted to call out that every opportunity that I got to explore a new place, I would find a way to just greet anyone who would look my way. So be a little bit shameful about that, not shameful, but be a little bit more open and put yourself out there, because the kinds of conversations that you could get in and the kind of perspective you learn, if you just say hi, you'd be very surprised. So these guys actually didn't speak a word of English, but we used our Pleco app and they were curious about where we were. This is a guy from the hostel that tagged along in some of these trips. And then of course you'd find uh, mistakes like these. I guess they were trying to say menu, but it was exclusively for men. Surprisingly, there was nobody else in that cafe. Only men were there. So maybe the woman took that sign very seriously. But you would constantly find, it's not like you don't find them here, but you'll find a lot of these funny signboards where they try to translate things and goof up in big ways. Yeah, so just continuing on that. So we went out for dinner the same day in a small cafe very close, not too far actually from our from our hostel, but we went a little bit little outside, so to avoid the many touristy places. And on the table next to us was this big group. And again, we were drinking beer, so it's easier to socialize when you're not thinking too much. So we started talking to these folks, and we ended up talking for about 3-4 hours. And I got quite close with this group. In fact, for the next few days also, we kept meeting once in a while. One of them had a pet store, so I hung out there for a bit. And in this group, they were curious about the travel plans. And I was telling them that my trip, I wanted to be about food. And that's what I've been enjoying so much so far. And of course, meeting people. And they suggested, one of them suggested, I can't remember whom, but then they unanimously agreed that Dalian, which is in the northeast, so if I just stop sharing my screen now, and you can see the map behind me, this place called Dalian. So this is Beijing and Beijing and Tianjin. This is Xi'an. And there's this coastal city called Dalian, which is a relatively new city, but they have really good seafood. So the moment they mentioned seafood, the Goan that I am, I was like, okay, these guys are saying good food. Seafood in particular is the best over there. So I was like, okay, fine. I guess I have to find a way to go to Dalian. So that's how I learned about this place called Dalian. I had no clue about Dalian before this, but these guys helped me realize that this place existed. Yeah, and the other thing that I do when I travel is, if there's a ThoughtWorks office, of course, it's good to go there and find ways to meet people that that have some common interests. And I decided to go on a Friday because I thought it would be a little lighter for people. And it was a good decision because they had like their new joinee ceremony. And just like we do, in fact, I think they take it a step up. I think we need to up our game a little bit. They make people stand on this big podium, and for new joinees, they have to sing songs, dance. I'll just see if I can open this. This was a very simple one, but so you have these kinds of ceremonies that that they do. This is just, I guess, somebody. We'll get to see the Beijing office just a little bit, but they've since then I think they've refurbished it and they've redesigned it completely. Yeah, anyway, so the interesting thing about Beijing office as well is they've divided it into two different halves. One half is for China local market. I don't know whether you all know, but China ThoughtWorks, around 60% of their business just comes from local market. And then there's a small 40% presence for servicing offshore clients. So the office is literally divided into two. And you'd also find, of course, more English speaking people in the one that supports the offshore division. They also hire separately and differently for these two areas. So in spending time in the Beijing office, by the way, I also had to stand up. Luckily, they just made me do like a version of Two Truths and a Lie. I didn't have to sing and embarrass myself and the country too much. But in that exposure to Beijing, I met this expat from US. Her name was Nina White. She was on, I guess, the PwC account, which has a fairly large presence in China. And we got to talking. I got to understanding. I talked to the OPs over there, understanding how things are going and so on. So it was just nice. The people were very welcoming. I was in shorts and like completely looking like a tourist entering there. So got a lot of eyeballs and people were genuinely curious about who this person is. But as I said, I happened to meet this person, Nina, and her brother works at Greenpeace. And she told me that that same night, Greenpeace was doing an inauguration of their new office in Beijing. And she invited me to the opening of that opening party. And Greenpeace office is just so beautiful. Everything is made of recyclable material. It was just so much fun. Like, I mean, I didn't have a plan, and suddenly these people, this shows up, got invited to this. And of course, so we had like a formal party there, but they were not allowed to serve drinks and stuff. So we went out as a group, met some very interesting people over there. And it's one of those parties or one of those nights that sometimes you ask yourself, right? You don't remember too many things the next day. And the next day you happen to look like this. So that was one of those nights. Amazing people. Some of them, one or two of them, I'm still in touch. But just so much fun hanging out with these folks. And hopefully you don't see too many of these photos in the future. Then the other one that I'd call out is this very interesting group. It's called Hash House Harriers. It's an international group that has this philosophy of exploring the city and getting a little active in your own city while having fun together as a group. So what they do every other week is they set a trail. So it's almost like a treasure hunt, and you follow that trail, and towards the end you have a small party. So they call themselves a drinking group with a running problem. They're there everywhere around the world. I've probably been to 8-9 different events across the globe. They had a chapter in Pune. They even have one in Hyderabad. And once a year they do this run called the Red Dress Run. And it happened to be on that weekend that I was there. And what they do is they bump up their registration charges, and all the proceedings, everyone wears a red dress, and the proceedings goes to a breast cancer foundation. So it's just to raise awareness and to make some to get some contribution to that cause. So this as well was super fun. We ran like idiots through the city in corridors of Beijing. We even ran on a railway track somewhere, so you can imagine the kind of ways you explore the city with a group like this. There was one stop in a small museum as well, so you can imagine everyone just looking at us, wondering who are these mad people running in crazy dresses. But phenomenal fun. Meet a lot of people who are open, and expats who are also looking to connect with different people. So that was the experience in mostly in Beijing. So again, just to highlight, none of this was really planned, right? You don't know what's going to happen, but the key is to trust yourself to say yes to things. Trust yourself also to forgive yourself if you do something stupid, but allow yourself to explore and allow yourself to meet new people. This was this is Beijing duck from one of the finest restaurants in China. It's very expensive, this meal. But yeah, the next day after all those hangovers, something so delicious was such a treat to have. And then, as I said, I decided to head to Dalian because that's where the food was. Now I want to highlight this journey. This was the train journey. In general, as I said, people are super curious. Always, they want to click photos. They want to talk to you. Especially, they learn you're from India. India is Hindu. The moment they learn you're from India, they've seen a lot of Bollywood movies in the past, and then suddenly, I think the Chinese government somewhere in the 70s or 80s stopped importing or stopped started censoring a lot of the movies that could come, foreign films in general. So they've all watched in some form some Bollywood movies. So they know India, and they know India as all these beautiful actresses and people that they see. So they're generally curious about different things. Now these folks, that Dalian is about a 12-hour, if I recollect, is about a 12-hour trip, and you wouldn't imagine these guys didn't speak a word of English. We probably ended up drinking a lot. By the way, they had some locally brewed alcohol, and over the course of 3-4 hours, we ended up talking about so many different things in terms of how they are doing, where their families are from, how many children they have, what their children are doing, a little bit about one child policy as well, because I was super curious about that. So I tried to engage in those conversations with them. But that Pleco app, as I was calling out, was just so helpful. I wish I had the logs of some of the conversations that I had. Unfortunately, it was on my old phone, but it was just such a rich conversation, and I was so surprised that people made an effort as well to reciprocate once you initiated that conversation. Then this was Dalian. So Dalian as a city is along the shore, as you saw earlier. And it's a fairly new city. It's not a very old city, so it doesn't have a lot of cultural significance as such. But it's a beautifully well-planned city. You'd see townships like this in the middle of nowhere. Most of them occupied. It's now the financial hub in some way of northeast China. And it has beautiful views. So the other thing is, because you have time, because I had time rather, I found ways to explore the city on foot. So if you can take a bus to explore, like there was a war museum on top here, and somebody said you can even trek it through a small path. It took maybe 1.5 hours. So always take those scenic routes. Always find ways to explore things. Dalian has, I think it's Asia's largest aquarium. So it's the second largest after Atlanta. And I happened to be in Atlanta as well a few years before this. And I can say by far the experience here was equally rich. So they have all the standard things that you would imagine, dolphin shows, things that they're doing with seagulls and stuff like that. So a lot of fun, a good way to spend a lot of time there and see some exotic plants. And of course, say hi to people and then find ways to get them to help you on what would be interesting to do in the city. Dalian did not disappoint. Unfortunately, I don't have too many photos of the rich seafood, but I ended up eating, there was one day where for 3 or 4 hours, I was just in that market area, sampling almost everything I could get my hands on. So I didn't...
Sea urchin?
I think it's a sea urchin. So the other thing you should know is I don't ask too many questions. If I see locals lining up at a place and it looks interesting, I jump at it. So I've tried multiple things. In some cases, I don't know what it was. Yeah, just continuing on that. Yeah, just always find ways to hang out with people, ask them about things. One thing that I always do on my travels is try to ask them some questions about 1 or 2 movies that they would recommend watching from their what are their favorite movies, and that always opens up people to give me recommendations. So I had a huge list of recommendations of movies and even songs. At that point, I wanted to see if they could help me learn or at least listen to some interesting music. So I would do that with most people that I met. Yeah, just building on that.
Did you try chopsticks?
Yeah, I only ate with chopsticks. So I was in Singapore before, in that stint. So I had learned to use chopsticks pretty well. So this trip was always just chopsticks. No matter how long it took to eat a meal, chopstick was the default. Of course, if it's a soup, you have it with soup, but yeah, at this point. Yeah, so as I said, very, very easy to meet people. Just say hi. This is at the hostel group. They screened movies and we watched a lot of movies. It's just going out at a normal pub. Food was delicious. I have to comment about food. And then the other thing is just how helpful people are. So you would go with your broken Mandarin trying to read something out of Pleco and ask them about directions. and they would just take out this paper, and a lot of people would do this. They would take out this paper and just write things down for you. If they spoke English, they would write the Mandarin version and the English version, and hand it over to you just at regular stores. So in that sense, I think people were, yeah, they would make your day in terms of just going out of their way to help you get to where you need to. Okay, so I have to highlight this because I found this very interesting. So there's this in China, women in their 60s, after they retire, they're called tamas. So I think it's elderly women or something, and they have a lot of, when they retire, they have this one, they just have one child, right? So the child is also typically on their own, independent, maybe even staying with the parent, but they don't necessarily have to earn, or yeah, they sometimes they do odd jobs, but they have a lot of money saved up, and stuff. So they have a lot of time at hand. And one thing that you'll see in any garden in China is this beautiful display of all of these elderly couples dancing. And it's not just one kind of dance. It's so, for example, I'll show you this, and then I'll show you the other one. Hopefully you can hear it.
This is so beautiful. Chinese ballroom dancing. It's called Tama.
So this is the ballroom dance, and then I want to hear. You can see it, right? Can you see it well? Okay. Then I want to show you this. Oops. Okay, now try to hear and see if you find something familiar.
I don't know whether you can hear it, but it's a Bollywood song going like Mere Naseeb Mein.
Could you hear it?
Yeah.
So it was so funny to watch that there was about, I think, 80 people dancing to this Mere Naseeb some song. I don't know whether it's a popular song. Is it?
Is it that they come here and dance daily, or how is it?
Daily. And there's not, Pramita, there's multiple, so if you see these photos, somebody is doing ballroom dancing, somebody is doing Bollywood, someone was doing like an exercise kind of thing. There were close to 400, 500 people in this park, and all of them are elderly people. So it was just like nice to see how they're spending their time in outdoors. Okay. Yeah, there was this very interesting prison museum. So Dalian had a very weird culture with a lot of Russians there in the past, and this prison museum was just scary in terms of the kinds of brutality they had, and some of the things there. So I spent almost a day there. I actually walked about 8 kilometers to get there, just thinking that it would be a nice walk as well to explore the city while going there. It was certainly worthwhile the walk, but also on the way back, I think doing that walk, just contemplating the kind of stories and the brutality that that some of these places had. I realize I'm running short of time, so I'll jump through some of this. So this was the trip back from Dalian, and this is Yujia Hong. I'm sure I'm abusing that name, but her name was Yujia Hong. That's how she pronounced it. But her English name was Betty. And this was a friend whose name I really can't, struggling to recollect. But in this strange journey, so she's a bachelor, she was studying Bachelor of Psychology. And I think this was when I learned so much about Chinese history, culture, censorship, one-child policy, how people, how the youngsters are also feeling super repressed, but they know they can't talk about anything. How WeChat censors everything that they talk about. So automatically it's censored and reports are sent, and next day people show up at their home. How the Chinese media, if you speak against the government, the next day or in the next few days, they would put false allegations against you and make you like a person who's gone against the government, and even your close friends and family will refrain to speak up because if they do anything, they are screwed as well. So I learned so much just by talking to these people about different kinds of things on that journey, and also they became really good friends. One thing, as I said, I was trying to do was also learn some Chinese songs. So managed to learn one song before I got there, and I managed to sing some of it. But it was just so nice that people are super friendly. When we reached Beijing back, so I was coming back to Beijing because I had to rush to go to Tianjin, which is where the Great Wall is for the marathon. Don't forget, this whole trip was supposed to be based on the marathon. Not this was all extra, but of course a lot of fun. But then I really got close with these two folks, and we decided that after the marathon we'd find a way to meet. Now jumping to the marathon. Sorry, someone saying something? Okay. Yeah. So I'd signed up for this half marathon. As I said, now all this fear is coming back. Last 2-3 weeks, or even couple of months, I've just been hogging. Last 2 weeks in China is completely hogging, drinking, unhealthy habits, and now here I am having to run this 21-kilometer marathon, which I'm not prepared for. But I still tell myself that, you know what, I'll just walk it off and find a way to enjoy it. Also, just as a precursor, so the day I get there, and I'll give you some try to paint a picture of what this marathon broadly looks like. So unlike some of the marathons, this terrain was not level, right? So you start off at the base and then you go about 9 kilometers up a hill before you reach the Great Wall. And then you climb about, so you run 9 kilometers and then you go about 2,500 odd steps, climbing these steps, right? After you run 9 kilometers. And each of these steps are not like the standard steps where you can just keep hopping. One step is like this, so the other step is a little higher. So you have to watch your step as you're climbing up. So that's another challenge with this marathon. The other one is that you go on the wall twice. So if you do the full marathon, you go on it on the 9th kilometer. You reach it, then you go on the wall for about, I think, 12 kilometers. Come down again, run another 15 kilometers, and then on the 35th kilometer you hit the wall again. So imagine you've run 35 kilometers and then you hit that wall, and then again you have to do 2,500 steps. Each of those steps are excruciatingly painful after you run a long duration. So I had, as I said, I'd signed up for the half marathon, but when I got there, they gave me the full marathon tag. But they still told me that you can do the half marathon at 16 kilometers. There's a way for you to take left, and if you want to continue with the half marathon, otherwise you can go straight. So I told myself that, I've only prepared for the half marathon, so let's just find a way to do that. But as I reached that 16th kilometer, I felt pretty good. And the way I was going about the marathon was, just 1 kilometer at a time, telling myself, okay, there's this time frame, look at the next check post and just focus on that, ensure that gets done, and then we'll see how it goes. So when I reached 16 kilometer, and because everyone's just running with you, there's children all along, like giving you high fives and cheering you on across in whichever villages you're running. So you really get pumped up, and somehow all these stalls with gels and bananas and water and electrolyte, I think I felt really good at 16 kilometers, and I said, you know what, let's just keep going straight. Probably I'll end up doing 25 or something like that, and when I get there, I can always call it a day. But let's keep going. It's a sign in a way that I was given the full marathon tag, so let's just go. I clicked this photo because this is my birthday, and somehow, it's when you're fixated on a number, you keep seeing it in different areas. The other one that I was, wait 1 second, I'll just stop sharing. If you see this, somehow I happen to see this more often than not. So this was one of the other recent runs that I did, which also has that. So I call it superstitious or coincidence, whatever. But I tend to see that number quite often. So just going back to the marathon experience, I was at 16 kilometers, then 20 kilometers, 25 kilometers. Constantly throughout this, they had set certain checkpoints to say that at the 35th kilometer, you need to be at a certain time at the wall, else you will be disqualified, or else you can't go on the wall again. So what I kept telling myself throughout this was, you know what, you have probably 15 kilometers more to go in this much time. Break it down by a kilometer and just really celebrate. So I reached the 19th kilometer. I would tell myself, yes, I'm feeling good. I was able to do it, and keep pumping myself up like that. Every 1 kilometer I had to go, and every kilometer was a success. And although the goal was maybe that 35th kilometer, the celebration was at every kilometer, and the ability to just feel good about it was at every kilometer. I'll play this video. This was like I was recording a couple of videos during the marathon. This was some of my insight that I had. So I'll just play this. Hopefully you can hear it.
This marathon has taught me a lot of things. We each in life are on this journey. We tend to pass fellow runners in our path to our destination. Sometimes we try to catch up with them. Sometimes they with us. But we have to realize each of us have our own pace. We need to find that pace. We need to determine the destination, and we need to strive to it without letting obstacles come in the path. Obstacles from drawing parallels, I think, are mainly mentally induced. Your body keeps telling you that you can't do this. Stop. Your leg is hurting. Your back is aching. It's too much. You haven't prepared. You haven't done anything in your life. But your mind, if it's strong and you just keep going, you have a goal in mind, I don't think anything can stop you. I truly believe that. It might be a little philosophical, I know. I have 4.5 kilometers left and around 1 hour, 10 minutes for the deadline, but that's my take on things, and I'm so glad I did the full marathon. Still a little way to go. I can't celebrate prematurely like this, but it's been a wonderful experience. The Great Wall, as you can see behind me, maybe not so much right now, but we've been walking along it 2 times. The second time, well, I wouldn't have imagined it would be so difficult. I can't begin to explain the sort of pain, the sort of anguish, the sort of lost hope in the middle of it all, when you're right on top of there and you want to give up. But in the end, you stay strong, you do what the mind tells you to do, you control your mind, you are in charge. That's the message I want to conclude with.
Yeah, so I'm sorry for that.
Play
So this
this
was
in all hands once for all of the people.
sure. Yeah, so I actually really felt in a state of nirvana because after a period, right, when you're just running, it's just you and your body and your mind talking to yourself. So whatever you start telling your mind, so just to give you an instance, so 35th kilometer, when you hit the wall again, each step, the first few steps that I took, I actually fell down like twice, cramps, and I'm like on the floor there, people coming and just massaging me. But then you keep telling yourself that, one more step, okay, reach that next destination, let's do it. You just, I genuinely believed at that point, and I think that has had such a strong lasting effect on me in the ability that your mind has to push your body. I wouldn't recommend doing something as stupid as I did without prepping to do something like this. But for me, I think my big takeaway was just feeling so much more mentally in control of what I'm able to do and what I'm able to tell myself. So each breath I would take, I would say, I'm breathing deep, and now I'm feeling a lot more energy, and I can go a lot more. I can go faster. And that's something that I've actually used on multiple other long treks, and just that positive reinforcement. Yeah, so this was the finish line. Any thoughts on this picture? I wanted to share a little secret with you. Nothing? So I look pretty fresh in this. So this was clicked at the start of the at the start of the marathon. And that's why you see
You see
people.
the expression of the person on the left.
Yeah, exactly. So this was clicked at the start. Unfortunately, I don't have a picture at the actual end. I have like a small video log of me talking, and I did a couple of those video logs just to remind myself of the experience that I was having in the course of this marathon. Just to wind up, this was the experience on the day after the marathon.
Just the day after the marathon, heading back to Tianjin from Beijing, and even a sight like this, climbing those stairs, freaks me out. One step at a time.
Yeah, so I genuinely was, even on that, I didn't take a video of that, but every step I took, I had to literally hold the pole and like take one step at a time because my legs were completely shattered, in the sense that it was aching so much, and this was just the day after without rest. But then again, got back to Beijing. I had a day and a half to spend before my flight, and got to hang out with Yu Hong and a friend, and they introduced me to. So what I really loved about this is they had some plans to explore this art district that I didn't even know existed. It's called District 798, and it's like the younger people just hang out there, and beautiful artisty kind of place, which I would have never known. It's not in most tourist books. Very few people typically think of going there. But because of them, I was able to see the city in a completely different fashion, explore beautiful museum, beautiful artwork, learn about things that I had no clue of. And yeah, this developed a friendship, I think, that lasted for a year or two. I lost WeChat when I changed my phone, and I just can't find a way to connect back with some of the folks that I met, unfortunately. But I learned so much about so many things from them in the course of this trip. So I'm just gonna, this is the last. So I think the reason I called it a little life-changing was multiple things, right? I think one, this was the first trip that I did, which was like a 3 week trip, the first large, long solo trip. I allowed myself to really be open, be free, let go with the flow. I realized that solo traveling is the way to go. And not just the 1 week trips that I'd been doing in the past, but I felt like I need to do something bigger. So in the course of that trip, I decided that the next trip is going to be a long trip. And that's where I made a commitment to myself that, and I decided in 2015 itself that in 2017, I'm taking 3 months off, and I'm going to do South America for 3 months. Some of you may know that the 3 months eventually became 5 months of South America, but the trigger was really in this trip to say that this needs to be part of my life and part of the way I explore the world. So that was one, solo traveling, and that conviction to do it. And also just to give you insights, right? When you travel solo, you have to force yourself to meet people. When you travel with somebody, you have a lot of shared experiences, and you have to compromise on what you want to do or what the other person wants to try or not. I do feel like if you're able to push yourself to travel by yourself, you will find yourself putting yourself into situations that otherwise feel uncomfortable, and you get a lot more confident. The more times you do it, the more times you trust your judgment about whether to go here or not, whether to trust people or not. I think you become a lot more confident. You get the ability to read people significantly better. You also learn more about cultures, I believe. So I would find ways to eat in places where cab drivers would eat, and talk to them, and learn so much about that perspective. So you see a different perspective that otherwise I think is hard to do if you don't have time, and if perhaps you don't have a companion who is interested in similar things. The other one that I felt was important as a takeaway for me was that marathon whole experience, about really feeling that I mean, the moment sometimes I find myself questioning things, I find ways to get back and just remind myself that you really are in control of most things, and you can ration it out. And if you feel it's the right thing to do, just go ahead and do it. And the last thing, of course, is that concept of doors, which still sticks very strongly with me in most things that I do. So when I think about opportunities, when I think about things, and many of you who've interacted with me would know, I tend to make overtly big commitments to say that, I'm doing this. The more I tell people about it, the more that door seems like I can't escape. I mean, I have to enter that door, right? For example, if it's a trip or if it's even a professional change of things, I would find ways to talk about it and also make some leaps to make that door feel like I need to enter that door, versus it just being a thought at the back of my mind. For me personally, public, the more I talk to people, I feel like I made that commitment, and I think that sort of yeah, it does some feedback to push me to sort of do that behavior. So those are some three things that I felt like that have stuck with me, and that I continue to have. I've taken 15 minutes more than I was supposed to. Happy to answer questions. Thank you for staying back.
Suddenly can't hear you.
Can't hear me? Is that
Yeah.
everyone?
No, we
Yeah.
can hear you.
I can hear.
Yeah.
Now I can.
Okay.
I think it's great that people still it's still full house. 15 minutes past the actual time. Very well presented actually. When is your next trip and where is it?
Last year I was supposed to do Africa for 2 months, but then 2-3 months was the plan. But then this move to Hyderabad happened. So hopefully next year I can do a long 2-3 month kind of a trip to Africa. That's on my mind. This year, in fact, I told myself that I'm going to do in May a family trip with to Italy and Portugal. Of course, that's not happening. In November, I am still planning to go to New Zealand. So that's the next trip.
Cool. I think if it's New Zealand, I can also take tips from Mehra.
Yeah, certainly.
We would like to hear about your South America trip also.
Sure. Whenever the next slot is
Our
available.
people in China, I had this question. They are fine. That
Sorry?
whoever you are in touch in China, are they fine with the situation?
Yeah, I was only able to reach out to 3 people, Shruti, in the multiple people that I met, but they were all fine. They were all okay.
And was it 2-week trip, Dubi?
3.
3 weeks.
How was the weather on that day, the marathon day?
It was very nice actually. It was bright. So we started at 5 a.m. in the morning.
Okay.
So it was nice and a little cool actually. The course of the day, it got a little hot, but not too bad. My hand was tanned and stuff. So I have photos of like different complexions here and here. But yeah, that's okay.
Yeah, we actually I enjoyed the every bit of story when I enjoyed.
Cool. Thank you so much. I mean, we can talk about travel anytime. It always brings a different version of myself, I think, when I talk about travel. So happy to talk about it anytime.
Yeah, I hope it inspired a lot of people. Please go ahead, even if it's a small trip or a big trip. Put down, sign up in the sheet. I think everybody is eager to listen to all of your experiences.
We are setting high bar now. Okay. To
No.
talk about the trip.
No, it's not I think what people should focus on is their experiences in the trip, because I do feel everyone changes in some way when you do a trip. You learn something about yourself if you have a little longer trip. So I think we should focus on that aspect a little bit as well in our talks. We should encourage people actually to talk about that if possible. All right.
Yeah, thanks, Dubi.
Cool. Thank you so much for
Probably
organizing.
make time to present your other trips as well, South America and other ones. Cool.
Will do.
See you all then.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.